was first and foremost a European lady. Now, being a European lady, in terms of caste or class status, she was above us, at least in those days. And second, and more importantly, she was married to one of the most prominent businessmen who belonged to the community. Which is why as many as 60 priests came forward to do her Navjot. Would those gentlemen who founded the trusts in the 18th century have admitted this European lady married to a most prominent businessman? My answer would unhesitatingly be yes. And if that were so, then our entire law would have moved on a completely different course. But what is important is that even on the judgment as it stands, how do you accept children of Parsi fathers who have married alien mothers when the community itself rejected something like this? You can possibly do this only on the ground that you would have to apply a forward-looking, contemporary community standard. Now, if you are to apply this forward-looking and contemporary community standard, you would perhaps arrive at the conclusion that children born of a Parsi father, of a mother who happens to be from some other community, should nonetheless gain admittance. The very fact that the community rejected it in 1905, but, as we know, accepted the judgment thereafter, shows us that given the time of the judgment, it was both progressive and correct. We are today over 100 years down the line. Don't forget, Bombay in 1909 and Bombay today are worlds apart. The Bombay of 1909 was a very stratified Bombay where each one belonged strictly to his community and did what his community wanted of him. The Bombay of today is like any one of the great cosmopolitan cities of the world, where everybody comes across everybody else, and we are all part of one huge diaspora, the result of which is the increase in mixed marriages that have taken place. This being the case, therefore, at least two important things follow from the English judge's judgment, Justice Beeman's judgment. One is the formulation, perhaps in some case in the future, of some contemporary standards test, which would take in what is required by the felt need of the times. And second, equally, the test of some committee of elders, because this is something that this great judge thought of in the year 1909. That when it comes to persons who have married out, and the obvious thing is, we are not talking about wholesale conversion. We are only talking about spouses and their children. Now, the problem is that there is really a double whammy in practice. And what do I mean by this? Because of the 1909 judgment, Parsi father who marries a woman from another faith, his children can become Zoroastrian, but the lady is kept out. The lady brings up the children. So that even though the children may well be Navjoted, ultimately, who knows what they grow up to be. And equally, the Parsi girl who marries out and who wants to retain her faith is not only regarded as out, perhaps wrongly, even under our law, but her children certainly are regarded as out. So the net result is that in cities like Bombay, Bangalore, Chennai, Calcutta, all the big cities of this country, where most of us are, the double whammy, in fact, comes into place. And the result is, by and large, that all children of mixed marriage couples ultimately are lost to the community. What then is the way out? The Privy Council, the second judgment, again shows us that the door is not slammed shut. There is some slight opening. And this brings me now to the second judgment. The second judgment was again concerned with a girl called Bella, who apparently was born of some Goan gentleman called Jones and allegedly a Parsi lady. Nobody really knew whether her mother was or was not Parsi, but allegedly Parsi. She was handed over to somebody in Rangoon, who in turn handed her over to his brother. Her parents died, and that good Parsi brought her up as his own child. At age 14, he had her Navjotit by none other than the great chief priest of Pune at that time, who was Kekobad Dastur. And when he wanted to bring her into the Agyari, there was a problem to start with. But then on the invitation of the priest, she was brought in and she was permitted to behave like any other Zoroastrian child. This being the case, 3 members of the community went to court on behalf of the community. The trustees didn't go to court. And again wanted an adjudication of this very question. Lord Phillimore, speaking for the board, another Englishman, went into the Davar Beeman judgment in some detail, said with a little hesitation and some reflection that he would ultimately follow their definition of Parsi Zoroastrian, namely the dual qualification, the ethnic and the religious, and apply it to a completely different factual circumstance. The factual circumstance this time being a government grant. You remember, in the Davar Beeman judgment, we had 28 trust deeds. All the lands that were dedicated were private lands. In Bella's case, we had government land dedicated, and dedicated this time specifically for a Parsi fire temple. This was the language used. The word Parsi comes here as it didn't occur in the 28 earlier trust deeds. The judges felt that this was really the same thing, in the sense that one had to discover what was meant by the Parsi stroke Zoroastrian community of Rangoon, and therefore said they would apply the 2 dual crests. But they didn't stop there. One can see on a reading of the judgment that they were uncomfortable with their decision. They reversed not only Justice Young, who was in the lowest court, but also the chief court. And the chief court had held that yes, there is a dual qualification, but since trust deeds refer really to religious and not ethnic purposes, it is enough that you are Zoroastrian. You need not be Parsi. This got reversed. Now, on reversing it, the judges went on to state, we want to make a distinction between community purposes, such as worship, right of worship, and property. And they said that the moment there is property under trust, you cannot admit a single foreign beneficiary, so to speak. Suppose the property is in form of amounts that are to be doled out. No person other than those who belong only to the Parsi Zoroastrian community can get a farthing. But in a case like community worship, so long as Bella, who is now Navjoted and a Zoroastrian, does not significantly disturb members of the community, does not create a nuisance, and so long as there are not too many Bellas that land up at the same time, the trustees of an institution have the discretion, this is very important, to admit such children. What was expressly rejected by the Privy Council is also very important. The plaintiffs came with a case to the court that the very entrance of a person like Bella would amount to desecration of the temple. Desecration was rejected by the Privy Council. This is important to bear in mind. The door was not slammed shut, but kept slightly ajar. And this door, which is kept slightly ajar, has in fact inured to the benefit of certain anjumans, which, if I may say so, are forward-looking like ours, where under the stewardship of President Shawak Nargolwala and many succeeding him, I am informed that the trustees have in fact taken a decision and do in fact permit the children of Parsi girls who have married out at least to avail of our fire temple. What then, therefore, is the way out today? Can we go to a court of law and say these judgments are wrong? Can we say that they are wrong because they are unconstitutional? I don't think so. I think it may perhaps be better to work within them. And the way out may be, short of course, of an institution which is set up today by some big philanthropist who may believe generally in the Zoroastrian, the larger Zoroastrian cause, where he specifies in his trust deed that this is meant not only for ethnic Parsis, but for Zoroastrians worldwide, short of setting up any such institution. The answer perhaps lies in the judgments of the two English judges, Justice Beeman and Justice Philemon in the Privy Council. The answer that we get from Justice Beeman is, first and foremost, why not have a community of elders to go on a case-by-case basis in order to determine whether the person is genuinely interested in coming into the community or is doing it for some oblique purpose. The moment there's a doubt, reject such person, no difficulty. That flows from Justice Beeman's judgment. And what flows from Lord Philemon's judgment is that if even one institution like the Delhi Parsi Anjuman in, let's say, Bombay or Bangalore or Pune or Ahmedabad or any of the other big cities were to follow suit and to say that at least so far as girls who have married out, their Navjotit children should be allowed, that would again be within the discretionary, the discretion allowed by Lord Philemon to the trustees of each institution, institution by institution. And this now brings me to the last part of the talk, which is what happens to girls who marry out, who, let us assume, may have married out under the Special Marriage Act and therefore not given up their religion, but done, let us say, a fera, the 7 steps, Saptapadi, around the fire, or done a nikah, or had a church marriage. Have they given up their faith? That seems to me to be a matter again for the courts and for evidence in each given case. But having said so, on the assumption that there is a per se test, which is that the moment you do the feras, the moment you have a nikah, the moment you have some ceremony, which is a religious ceremony outside, you are deemed to have given up your religion. We come to 2 very important things that have been told to us, one by the riwayats, which I have adverted to earlier, and one by the singular case of Mr. Neville Wadia. All of you must be in the know that Mr. Neville Wadia at age 83 was admitted into the Zoroastrian faith, having been born into the Anglican Church. How did this happen? His father, Sir Ness Wadia, married an English lady and converted to the Anglican faith even before Neville was born. Neville was therefore born into the Anglican faith. Having been so born and having been a member of that faith for 80 odd years, in the twilight of his life, he honestly felt, having studied the religion, that he wished to have his Navjot done. And again, being a gentleman like R.D. Tata, consulted the chief priests. 5-2, 5 learned chief priests said there was nothing wrong and that they ought to admit him, and in fact admitted him. So that his case shows us 2 other very important things. One, that so long as you are born of a Parsi father, even though you are not ever admitted into the Zoroastrian faith, at any time before you die, you may be Navjotit. And he was in fact Navjotit at age 83. And equally interestingly, the fact that he was never Navjotit would not stand in the way. So therefore, the answer now to be applied from Neville Wadia's case and from the Riwayat, which if you remember, specifically said, if persons go out, can you bring them back? The answer was yes. On the assumption that these girls have gone out, because they have in fact undergone some ceremony or the other in some other faith, I would say it would be very easy to bring them back. Provided, of course, they file an affidavit and they say they genuinely wish to come back and they have their Navjot redone again. That would obviate all difficulties in their way and would permit such girls to come back to the mainstream of Zoroastrianism, either never having left it or having left it for some other purpose, which may be oblique or otherwise. With this, I end my talk and only hope, maybe against hope, that the community looks a little forward. The law was progressive, both in 1909 and in 1925. Let us try and work within it and be as progressive as they were when applied to the fact situation as it obtains today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ranjan. Excellent. Thanks, Ranjan.
We are open for questions.
The object of this talk is a little different. The object of this talk is to deal with what we have within our community at present. If you will notice, the Neville Wadia example was taken because despite the fact that Sir Ness, his father, had become Christian before he was born, he fulfilled the very first qualification, the ethnic qualification, that he was born of a Parsi father. So it would not perhaps be correct to say that the Neville Wadia instance could be torn out of context and would be allowed to apply to persons who had absolutely no ethnic contact with the faith at all. Second, the reason Neville Wadia was used as an example was only so that if girls have in fact gone out on their marriage, what is the way out? The way out is to bring them back. So it was only with this in mind that the example was given, not, as I had repeated earlier, to open the doors wide. Yes. Yes.
You said something about Sumi Tata being a European, being out of
That's not what I said. What I said was, if you put yourself in the place of any member of the Parsi community in 1903, which is when she was Navjotit, and you were to ask that member, would you accept Mrs. Suni Tata to be part of your community or would you not? The answer probably would be yes, because being a European in 1903 meant that she belonged to a strata of society slightly higher than us. That is what I say. As perceived in 1903. And if that were so, combined with the fact that she was married with one of the most prominent industrialists in the community, would almost make it conclusive to say yes. Just as Akbar, for example, in the 1570s, was received with jubilation in Navsari after a Sadra and Kasti was put on it. I could even think of examples like Akbar and bring them down the line. Take Queen Victoria. Now suppose Queen Victoria had a servant called Rustam instead of Abdul. You remember Abdul was her favorite, from whom she took almost any liberty. And suppose Rustam was a Parsi priest. And suppose Rustam made it clear to her that Zoroastrianism was something fantastic and she accepted. What do you think the community would have said?
Aapri Rani.
Yes. And one more. Come to modern times, come to Mrs. Indira Gandhi. Suppose she wanted to gain entrance. I have no doubt that all the elders and all the chief priests, etc., would, at least from their point of view, bend every rule to bring her in. Yes. Yes, please.
You very rightly said that the rulings given by Justice Beeman and Filmore, we should try and work within that.
Yes.
Now my query is that supposing there